Hello and welcome to this data overview for Whitewater Middle School. As staff members at Whitewater, we know and appreciate that we serve an amazing community of parents and students. We have the best administrators, the best teachers, and the best students. Whitewater Middle School has an exceptional reputation for providing quality education and producing students that enter and complete high school at some of the highest rates in the state of Georgia. We continue to rise above because of our efforts to find new and innovative ways to teach our students. One way that we are going to explore in this presentation is through data. We will use available data to highlight our strengths and help identify any areas of weakness. This graph supports the information on the previous slide. The data is for Whitewater High School, but is applicable as Whitewater Middle School is the only feeder school to the high school. Graduation rates at Whitewater High would be an indicator of success for students at Whitewater Middle School, given the lack of transiency in the area and the absence of other feeder schools. Whitewater Middle School's latest school climate ratings were very high, comparable to both the district and the state. For the last 3 years, Whitewater has scored higher than the district and well above the state relative to overall CCRPI score. Teachers, students, and parents recognize Whitewater as a safe, respectful, and academically responsible environment. Academically speaking, students at Whitewater Middle School also consistently outperform their peers in the district and across the state. The 2017 mathematics end-of-grade milestones data shown here shows that over 60% of Whitewater students scored at the level of proficient or above on the Georgia milestones, while in Georgia at large, less than 50% of students scored at the level of proficient or above. The same holds true for the English Language Arts end-of-grade milestones scores shown here. Whitewater students outperformed their district and state peers in this subject area as well. An examination of reading levels among 8th grade students also shows that Whitewater students outperformed their district peers and performed well above their peers across the state. Consistently, more than 75% of Whitewater students have a Lexile measure above 1,050 at the end of their 8th grade year. The most current demographic data for Whitewater shows that the majority of students are white. Of the overall population, only 36.4% of the population identifies as non-white. The second largest group of students at Whitewater are Black or African American. These students make up approximately 20% of the population. The demographic trend data shown here indicates that there is very little change occurring in the population. The last 3 years prior to 2017 are shown on this graph. There has been no major shift in the demographics of Whitewater for several years now. The staff diversity at Whitewater Middle School is not reflective of the student population, with only 3% of the professional staff identifying as African American. Of the 918 students last reported at Whitewater Middle, 22% were considered economically disadvantaged, and 13% of students have disabilities that impact learning. There is no English Language Learners program at Whitewater Middle School, so very few students with little to no English proficiency attend Whitewater. Unlike some of the demographic data reported earlier, there has been an increase over the last 3 years in the number of students that come from economically disadvantaged households. As we begin looking at data, understand that every piece of available data has not been included in this presentation. This data overview will focus on a single type of data, specifically milestones data, so that we can take a look at underlying trends in the data and work to identify our strengths and weaknesses as a school. The data shown here is 6th grade end-of-grade milestones data. You may notice that science and social studies data is missing for the 2016-2017 year. This is because the state decided not to require the science or social studies milestones for grades 6 and 7 beginning in the year 2016-2017. Notice the long red lines and the very small purple lines for each subject. If students are performing better as we move through the years, The red and blue lines will become shorter, and the green and purple lines will become longer. Bear in mind that as you look at this data, the 3 years of data represent 3 distinct groups of students. The group of students that took the assessment in 2014-2015 moved on to 7th grade in 2015-2016. In order to examine growth trends within that cohort, we would need to look at 7th grade data for 2015-2016. The data shown here shows those scores. If we wanted to isolate patterns in growth, we would need to examine only the 2015-2016 data from this graph. Yet there are still reasons to consider data in this manner. Looking from grade level to grade level, there is an overall reduction in the percentages of beginning learners and a general increase in the number of proficient and distinguished learners. As students get older, they are either performing better on the test or the test itself has changed. Notice that the green lines have begun to overtake the red and the purple lines have all grown. This indicates that there are more learners reaching proficiency. On this final aggregate display, we can see major change occurring among the lengths of each line. The blue lines are shrinking, the red lines are shrinking, and both the green and the purple lines are getting longer. This is further evidence to support that each year students are performing better on the tests. Yet to really understand how growth is occurring, we need to isolate a single cohort. On this graph, data from 3 years for the same group of students is displayed. By looking at the data in this manner, we can see that a group of students that started 6th grade during the 2014-2015 school year showed growth each year in every subject for the 3 years shown. The greens and purples here still indicate proficiency or above. By the end of their 8th grade year, very few students were still considered beginning learners in any of the core academic subjects. In this graphic, we've isolated the English language arts scores to show just how positive the trends are for the collective student body. The data supports that students as a whole are showing growth in English language arts. Where we wanted to dig deeper was in determining whether the growth trends we were seeing were isolated to certain student groups. This chart shows the disaggregated data for the 2 major student populations represented at Whitewater Middle. At first glance, the data still seems to support a generally positive trend, but as we delve deeper, we can see some cause for concern. On this chart, I've isolated the Distinguished Learner Indicator. If you focus your attention on the trend lines shown, you will see that even though African American students maintained a respectable trend of approximately 15% of students achieving the mark of Distinguished Learner, which is higher than the state percentage, the number of white students achieving the mark of Distinguished Learner nearly doubled among the Whitewater students over the same period of time. We can look at this data and ask, why would white learners that are experiencing the same curriculum and resources be learning at a more profound rate? Where are we missing opportunities to support African American students so that they might experience the same increase in proficiency? Out of an abundance of curiosity, I wanted to see if math trends were the same as English trends for the same cohort. This chart shows the percentages for students scoring at the level of proficient and above for mathematics over the same 3-year period. The data here did not easily reveal trends. Overall, student proficiency rates remained very similar from year to year. I was surprised by the Distinguished Learner data. If you look closely at the data for 2014-2015, it appears that more students were Distinguished Learners that year than in either of the other 2 years. I decided to isolate that data further. The data does seem to indicate that students performed significantly worse between the 2015 and the 2016 administration of the test, but the recovery began for the 2017 administration. Examination of the test for those years may indicate that either the difficulty of the questions changed or the addition of a writing component on the mathematics EOG had an overall negative impact on student scores. What I do think is still important to note is that there still seems to be an achievement gap between the African American and white students at the highest levels of learning. For each year shown, nearly twice as many white students as a percentage were considered distinguished learners. To look further into these trends in the data, I re-examined the data this time for a single cohort, going back to the group of students that started 6th grade in 2014-2015. I wanted to see if the patterns that emerged when looking at annual administrations for different student populations held true when examining a single population. If we again isolate the distinguished learners, we can see that for these high-level performers, the trends hold true. On a positive note, both African American students and white students showed growth in this proficiency area annually. However, the growth is exponential for white students and more linear for African American students. The achievement gap is certainly pronounced here as well. I re-examined the mathematics data in the same manner, looking for similar trends. For consistency, I decided to isolate the distinguished learners again. The data here did not support the growth trends we saw earlier, but does show some large achievement gaps between the learners in this cohort. Again, nearly twice as many white students as a percentage reached the mark of distinguished learner. Our strengths at Whitewater Middle School. Whitewater Middle School is a safe and welcoming environment where student learning is a priority. The data shows that 1. Whitewater students continue to show growth, especially in the area of English language arts. 2. Whitewater students consistently outperform their grade level peers across the state of Georgia. And 3. Regardless of cultural background, Whitewater students are progressing positively away from the beginning learner status. So where can we get better? Despite the exceptional scholastic records being achieved by Whitewater students, there are still some areas where improvement is needed. Whitewater needs to focus on, first, closing the achievement gap that exists between white and African American students in the area of mathematics. Second, exploring the differences and growth trends between white and African American students in English language arts. And third, we need to examine our level of cultural proficiency to determine whether curriculum changes are necessary to meet the needs of a more diverse population. So what's next for Whitewater Middle School? I'm going to leave us with 3 points to ponder. First, do we believe that the achievement gaps can be closed? And if we do, what can we do to narrow the divide? Second, do you believe your curriculum is culturally relevant for all students? If you are unsure, I'd like to ask you to seek help from another teacher or administrator that can help you determine your level of cultural proficiency. And third, how can you use resources that are already available to benefit students in your current classroom? This last one is a challenge. How can you use the resources that you already have to make it better for your students, to improve learning in the classroom? I appreciate your attention to this presentation, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you.